Okay, so we now need to create a table for all the transactions that are made, right? So I'm going to go inside finance.db and create a table called transactions. So you could either create a table from here, or like you could create a table by adding the name of the table and number of fields, or you could just directly write a SQL query, which I would prefer. So I would say I would create a table, call it transactions, and then I would say the following. In this table I need an ID, right, for the transaction ID, right? So it's the integer primary key. Okay, and I would also make it such that the primary key is automatically incremented. So I would say auto increment, and then I would say not null, because I don't want this to be null. Then after this I would have a user ID field, which is an integer, and this is also not null. After which we would have symbol, and this is going to be a text field, which is going to be not null. And then after this we're going to have the number of shares. You're going to have the number of shares, and I'm going to call this shares, and number of shares is an integer, not null. Then after this we are going to have price, which can actually be a number as well as it could have floating points, right? So this is numeric, so I say not null. After this we will have transacted, which is a timestamp. Default timestamp is going to be what? Default timestamp is going to be the current timestamp. Okay, so not null. All right, so then after this we would have to say foreign key. I would say foreign key user ID, which is references users ID. So what's happening here, if you see, is you have a table which is essentially the transactions table. So what's going to happen here is that's the ID for the ID of the transaction. So let's say this is the first transaction that is done. By which user? That's user ID. Let's say by user ID 1. What share, the symbol of the share that he or she has bought. Let's call this Tesla. And let's then say the number of shares that person has bought. Let's say he or she has bought 10 shares, right? And then the price at which the person has bought the share, let's say, is at $2,000, something like this. 2000, like 2000.58, something like this, right? And then transacted is actually going to be a timestamp, like 2020 8/1, something like this. Okay, and then the time as well. And then what we're saying is there's a users table with us, right? There's a users table and there's this transactions table. And so what happens is that this user ID is a foreign key, which means there's an ID field that's present in the users table. And we would look here and we would find out that, okay, this user ID is corresponding to this user. Let's say the username is R, the password, the hash is something, and there's some cache, right? There's cache inside the users table, and all the transactions are done in this transactions table, right? Let's see if this works. I'm just going to run this. Okay, so we've been able to create the table. If we go back to structure, we can see whether this table was created successfully. We go to structures and see, okay, this is the first thing. ID is an integer, which is not null, and default value is nothing. And this is the primary key, right? Auto increment is really important, so I'm just going to check if we have used the auto increment thing or not. I think we have, right? So yes, we have also used auto increment. So this field is not necessarily it doesn't need to be filled by the programmer because it's going to be auto incremented. Okay, then user ID is a foreign key, which is not mentioned here, and symbol is text. Shares is an integer. Transacted price is numeric, and transacted is the timestamp. Okay, so right now the first thing we'll do is we can reverse search. So Control R, and you can just export the API keys to see what is the state of the application right now. If I say flask run, Okay, I get something. I get this screen, and let's see what users do I have. I have only one user right now. R. Okay, the cache. Let me just update the cache to something like. So what I want to do is I'll just say I'm going to update cache from users. Update users, and I'm going to set cache to be equal $10,000, right? So that I am essentially back to I'm back to square one, starting off with $10,000, and this is my user ID. So if I say R and password is 1 in this case, so now we've got this to do. We have to finish this off, the indexing, and we've finished off this buy thing. So let's say Tesla is costing you this much right now. Now the buy functionality of this site is a little bit, needs a little bit of modification, right? So we're going to go and look at we're going to say Control C right now, Control L. I'm going to go to this, I want to go to buy. I want to go to buy, and then I'm saying whether, one thing I need to change first of all is that this thing is a text field, so I can enter anything. So I would need to change that inside buy, change it to number, I would say. So I would go here, I would say type equals number, and we can also specify the minimum. So I can say minimum equals, let's say you want to buy, you can buy one share. You have to buy one share at minimum. At least one share needs to be bought, right? So this is what is required here. Then we go back to this buy. Okay, why is that? Because we need to run this again. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to run this again. I'm going to say flask run. Okay. And then if I go back to, let's say, yeah, one, if I quote something, this is, okay, I made some mistakes there. Okay, if I am inside quote, look at Tesla stock. Tesla is about $2,200. Go to buy, then you can see that I get this here, which is a special feature of Chrome, I guess, which once it, probably in HTML5, this is a new feature where if you say type number and you can say minimum, it restricts you from entering anything other than a number, right? And even if you enter decimal, even if you entered floating point numbers, it would still not allow you, right? It won't allow you to submit this form. That's good error checking on the front end, and you can add more error checking on the back end as well, but I'm not going to do that right now to keep this thing short. So okay, by what is happening is we're asking the user, the current user we have, for the cache that the user has, and then what we're doing is we're updating the cache. If the updated cache is negative, the user can't afford this stock. So we are apologizing to the user that you've entered something which is too large. You've entered a lot of so the number of shares as you've entered so many that you can't afford those many shares. So now we can db.execute executing. We are setting the cache, right? That's a good thing to do. Yes, we are changing this field over here, right? Changing this field here. But what we also need to do is to add something to the transaction history. So all the transactions that are made, we must add a transaction that is made. So let's say I want to buy one share of Amazon. Then we should also change and update to, or add something with regards to, you should insert something in the transaction table as well, right? So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say db.execute. I'm going to say db.execute insert into transactions. What I want to insert here. Let me just, if I do this, I can essentially perform a multi-line string. I can perform a multi-line SQL query, and because it allows for a multi-line multi-line strings, right? So if I do insert into use transactions, what I want to insert now, if you look here, we have transaction. If I go to the structure of transactions, right? We have the user ID. We need to fill the user ID with the current user ID, the person who's logged in, the symbol, the shares, and transacted. Transaction will be filled in automatically because it's default value. This will be filled in automatically because this is a auto increment field. So we need to enter user ID, we need to enter symbol, we need to enter shares, we need to enter price. These 4 things. So let's do that. Insert into transactions user ID, comma symbol, comma shares, comma price. And then what are the values that needs to be inserted here? Let's say we want to insert the values EUS user ID. I can do this. I think this would be better. We would like to insert user ID. Okay, these are fields that will be filled as parameters, right? So symbol, shares, price. And then here we were going to fill this up. We're going to fill this up. Say user ID equals session user ID and a bunch of stuff, right? So let me just use commas here. So okay, we're going to fill this up. You're going to fill in the user ID. We have to fill in the symbol, right? Symbol. Where do we get the symbol from? The symbol, we can get this from the stock, right, which we looked up. So the stock symbol, right, and then we can say shares, the number of shares, we can get this from shares, which is where can we find this? Right over here, shares. And then price is going to be equal to stock, the price, current price, which we looked up, right? So stock price. And after having done this, there's one thing that we can do. We can also flash bot. What this does is this is provided to us via this Flask framework, right? And what happens when we use that is something like this. If we go and buy 1 stock of Amazon, then this entire thing reloaded. So to log in once again. If you want to buy something, let's say 1 stock of Tesla or 2 stocks of Tesla, and we bought that, right? So now how do we see the things that we bought? We need to implement the index, okay? The portfolio that we have, the holdings that we have, we need to implement that now. So let's move on to the index function, or the index route, which is essentially just a simple backslash right here. So what we need to do here, we need to show all the transactions that were made, okay? So, and then we need to group them up. So for example, let's say you have bought, I go into SQL, go to browse. I have this user ID 1 has bought 2 shares of Tesla. Let's say I buy a couple more shares of Tesla, R1, and then we have to go back here, buy Tesla. Let's say we buy 3 more shares of Tesla. I think we can't afford this. Yeah, we can't afford it. So, okay, let's buy 1 more share of Tesla. Can we buy 1 more share of Tesla? Okay, we bought that, right? We bought it. And now if we go back to this place inside browse, you can see we've bought 3 shares of Tesla, 2 plus 1. So what we need to do is we need to essentially write a SQL query that would group this, it would sum this up, right? And you would group it by the symbol. So let's say we buy 2 Microsoft shares. If I want to go here, buy 2 Microsoft shares, or let's say 5 Microsoft shares. Am I able to buy that? Or okay, I bought 5 Microsoft shares. If I go back here, look at the transactions. I have bought 5 shares of Microsoft. Okay. So now what I need to do is I need to essentially group them by the symbol, right? So that I have only one place one field called Tesla. So here's what I want to do, right? I want to say something like this. The symbol that I should require is, I need something like this. I need symbol Tesla, and shares should be 3, something like this, right? And the price should be the current price, which I'll get from the lookup function, right? So yeah, so how do I get to this point where I have a table, where I have or table or result where I have Tesla 3, Microsoft 5, something like this, right? And then we would just look at the current price and so on. But what we want is essentially this. We want the symbol followed by the number of shares. That's it. That's all that we want. So how can we do that? Well, we can do something like this using SQL by using these things called aggregate functions, which means we can select sum of all the shares, and we can also select a symbol from transactions, right? Say from transactions where user ID, let's say equals 1 for now. We're going to change that, and then we're going to group by symbol, and then I'm going to say having. Well, you know what? We should also think ahead and think about selling. When you're selling this, when you're selling a stock, then the number of shares should be negative, right? So if we sell 3 stocks, then we would have an entry here which would say Tesla to -3. So we would have an entry here. If we are selling a stock, we would have this entry. Let's say Tesla TSLA -3, right? And whatever the price is, 2200 at the time. Okay, and the date when we sold that stock. So having understood this, we need to sort of, if we are summing this up and we get 0, then we shouldn't display that in our final table, final portfolio, right? Because we don't own any stock. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, when I'm writing my SQL query, I would essentially say something like having sum of shares should be greater than 0. Okay, so I'm going to write this once more. Select symbol. I'm going to select symbol and sum of shares, and from transactions where user ID, let's say equals 1. I'm going to change that in the code to be more general. Grouping this, I'm going to group this by the symbol, and I need to have the sum of the shares to be greater than 0. Okay, so yes, let's end this. I'm going to copy this so I don't lose this, and then I get 5 shares of Microsoft, 3 shares of Tesla. So the sum of shares, what it did was it added the shares up. So I can also do the following. I can say this, and you know what's happening here is I'm getting the sum of shares as the column name. It's kind of ugly, so what I'm going to do is I can rename these columns. So I can say as total shares, and you know what, I can also go here and change this part. Okay, Control C, and I can go here, and then you can see we have total shares here and symbol over here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to application.py, and I'm going to just copy and paste this over here because this is the main thing that needs to be executed. So I'm going to say db.execute. db.execute this entire thing. Okay. All right. So I'm going to execute this, and I'm, instead of user ID 1, I'm going to say user ID equals colon user ID, and then I'm going to say comma user ID equals, we need the current user, right, who's logged in to the session. So I can get that using this, right? And so I should be able to get all the holdings of this person. So now I need to display those holdings. So what I can say is I would want to display, I need a for loop, right? So what I want to do is I want all the rows that I get from here. So I can say rows equals db.execute all this thing, all of these things. Then I can say, you know what, for all these rows, for every row in rows, all these rows, right, I can append to an empty array and I can add all these holdings, and I need to modify some couple of things, right? Because I only get the symbol and the total shares from here. I also need to add the stock name, the stock, the total number of shares that a person has brought, the total price, and things like that, right? So I need to do something like this so that I can modify, I can add some things in these rows, right? I can't just simply look at the rows and be done with it. So I'm going to say symbol. So I'm going to create a dictionary, right? And I'm going to append to this holdings that dictionary. So you gotta get what I'm seeing. So what I'm going to do is, for every row that I get, what are the rows that I get? I get rows like this, right? I get a symbol and I get total shares corresponding to that symbol. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look this up. Okay, so when I'm here, so I'm going to look up, say stock equals lookup row symbol, right? I can look up the symbol. I have this access to this row. From this row, I can look at the symbol field, and I want to look that symbol up to get all the information, the current price and the name of the stock, so on and so on and so forth. So I'm going to look up that stock, and then what I'm going to do is, to this holdings array over here, I'm going to up this empty array. I'm going to append one row at a time. I'm going to append all the information corresponding to that stock. So I'm going to say, I'm going to add some symbol, a symbol to this dictionary, right? This is a dictionary because I have curly braces on. So in this dictionary, the first key is symbol. The value of this I can get from this stock symbol, this lookup that I've done. Symbol is also there. So then after that, I can say name, and the name is going to be what? Name is going to be stock name. And after this, I can say shares. Shares is going to be where do I get the number of shares from? Well, the number of shares I can get from this row, right? Because this row that I've got from the total number of shares, I have the total number of shares here. So I can say row total shares, and then followed by, I can say price gets stock price, right? From the stock that I looked up, I can get the price. So once I have the price with me, I can also calculate the total, right? So to do that, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say total is going to be stock price times row total shares that I bought for the stock. And then you know what, there's a format thing that we can do. We can use USD so that we can convert this number into a proper USD format, right? Which says essentially you would add $, and you would just display 2 decimal points. So you would display 2 numbers after the decimal point. That's what USD does, nothing fancy. So then after that, what you need to do is you also, in the portfolio thing, right? If you want to show something, you also want to show the current cash that the user has. So to do that, I'm going to execute another query here. I'm going to execute the query to get the cash from this table, from the users table. And you see in users, we have the cash right here, right over here, the leftover cash, right? So the current cash that I have, you can get from the users table. So I'm going to say select cash from users, where user ID equals user ID. And then user ID is the, actually, you know what, from users, you only need to select the ID. because you don't have user ID here, you only have ID here. Okay, ID equals user ID, let's say, and then user ID would fill that in through the session variable. So session user ID. So this gives us a bunch of rows again. So what we want to do now is to get the cache from this. So I'm going to say cache equals rows of 0, and then cache field should be inside this. And then I would essentially render that. I need to render something here. I would say return render a template called index.html. Okay, followed by a variable called holdings. Let's say we call them holdings. We want to send this over there. So holdings equals holdings, and then we can send cache, which is going to be USD of cache. There's one more thing that is required here, the grand total, which is the total of this essentially plus the cache that you have. So your current net worth, so to speak, would be the cash that is remaining in your bank account, followed by the sum of all the holdings that you have, right? The current price. You would total all the current prices times the number of shares, which is essentially this, and you would add that to your grand total. So let me just be more clear. I'll say grand total plus equals this entire thing, right? And then what I'll do is I'll add this to the grand total. So grand total equals 0, and initialize it to 0, and then I'm going to add that over here. And also I must add the cash that I currently have in the bank account over here. So now we have render template, index.html, holdings, the cash, and we need to another variable called grand total. Let's say that's equal to, I'm going to convert that into USD, grand total, right? Okay, so now I'm going to create the index.html template. So I'm going to go here, index.html. So a new file, index.html, and now over here I need to do the same thing as we did here. You need to extend the layout. We need to add title and change the title to portfolio, because this is my portfolio, right? This is the portfolio of the user that has logged in. So after which we have the block main, in which we would write the code that is specific to this index.html page. So what is specific to this page? We would use a table. Okay. In this table, we would have a header. You would have t-head. And you know what? You would also like to style this. So to style this, I would say class equals table striped. This is from the documentation you can read on the Bootstrap library, where you would have a striped formatting, which would look really good. So this is going to be more clear when we see what happens at the end. So now you would need, in the header of the table should be something like this, right? This is the header. So you would have, well, how should the header look like? The header should look like this: symbol followed by name, followed by number of shares, followed by the price, followed by total, TOTAL. So we need to do something like that. So I'm going to say a table row. It's going to be symbol. Then we would have a name, right? The next one over here. So next one is going to be name. The next one is going to be shares. And so on and so forth. So I'm just going to copy this one 2 more times. I'm going to copy this 2 more times and get the price followed by total. So after this, we would create a footer. This is the header, right? Now we create a table footer. In this footer, we are going to have a table row, which is going to be essentially, we're going to skip these 4 columns, and we would have the grand total over here. Okay, so I'm going to essentially look at the table td table one. We have a row, right? You need a row, so tr, and then inside this row we would have this thing td. What we do is call span equals 4. We want to skip these all these four columns, and we would display something over here, right? So we need a td that would take up 4 spaces. That's why we've done this. Now, after having done this, you would just look at the grand total that we get from. Where do we get this from? This variable from? We get this variable from here, right? We have grand total over here. Okay, pretty interesting. Now, after having done this, we need the body. Now, inside the body, what's going to happen is inside the body. Oops. So this is the body, right? Over here, let's say you bought some holding. So for every holding in holdings, what we want to do is we want to display the symbol name of the holding. So holdings, you do something like holding symbol, right? And then we do holding name and shares and price and total. And this is going to be clear just a second, because what's happening here, from here we are passing in this variable called holdings. Now we want to use that variable over here inside our template. So we're going to go ahead and look at the t body, right? And then we can look at we can use a for loop here. So for every, we can say for every holding in holdings, do the following. What do you want to do? You want to display a table row, so to speak. Okay, table row tr. Okay, I'm just gonna edit that out. tr. Why is this capitalized? tr. Okay, tr is here. This table row, inside this table row, inside a row, basically we have a row here. We would want to display what? So here's that row, right? Here's the row that we're talking about. For this, every row that you're looking at, we would need to have a table data, which would have the symbol, the name, the shares, the price, and the total. Pretty simple, right? I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna say td holding followed by symbol, right? And then after this we're gonna have all of these things, right? So symbol, then we're gonna have the name, and we're gonna have the price, and then total. So I'm gonna say symbol, name, shares, exactly what we've had here, right? We created these things, and then we display these over here. Shares, price. I wish there was a shorter way of doing this, but I don't know. If you know, just write them in the comments. So price and then total, right? Total. Okay, so let's see. After having done this, is it successful or not? But before doing that, let's just end this for. So to do that, I'm just going to say end for, something like this, and then this would be the proper syntax to end this for loop. And after this, we need to display the cache also that we sent from here, right? We send the cache that the user currently has. So after having done all this, we need a special row. So you have a row tr, row in which we would take essentially we would take we would have a data which would take table data, which would take 4 columns, because we want to skip symbol, name, shares, and price, and we need to sort of put that cache over here, right? So this is the cache that we have. So we want the cache to be here and the grand total to be here. So we've done this grand total. We've sort of finished this grand total and displayed it over here. We will also need to display the cache, right? So to do that, I'm just going to do the same kind of same frame framework, not the framework, it's the essentially this same structure for this as well. So I'm going to leave 4 spaces, and then we're going to display the cache that the user currently has, right? Currently the user has some cache which you're going to display. Okay, let's remove some extra these things, extra TRs. Okay, this seems like this should work. Let's go here and see if there are some errors that we need to correct. So if you go back here, let me just remove this once. Okay, so let me just remove that once. So I'm going to go here and say R1 to log in. And then let's see if this works. It says apology. Why? Because we are not rendering template or what? We need to render some template. Internal server error. Why is there an internal server error? Because okay, we didn't close this guy. We didn't perform closure. We didn't have an ending brackets over here. So now after doing that, after having done this, we can just go ahead and go back to login screen. We go back to login screen and just try to log in again. Okay, this is what we get. As you can see, these things are not at all where we want them to be. Now, the reason being is this TR. Let's see what's the problem. T head has these fields, right? We would, instead of TR, we want them to be headers. So we would say T head. Sorry about that. So we just say T head over all these places instead of TR, because TR doesn't make any sense. It's not a row, it's a heading. So see, if you do TD, what happens is you don't get the bold. I think you don't get the boldness, so to speak, which is, let me just refresh this. Okay, you see, you don't get bold, this in bold, which it sort of blends in with all the rest of the table. So to make this stand out, I must use th here. So let's use th there, table header, and then let's reload this. Okay. So let's also, we can do one more thing. You can just say what this means. Like, we don't know what this means, right? This is the grand total, this is the cache. Let's say the cache that is available can be set over here. So I'm going to say something like cache over here. Okay, so once I do that, go back here. Let me go back here and see. Okay, cache comes in the center. So what I want to do is I want to also change a couple of things in the styles.css file so that I can change the stylings. So I'm going to go back here into the static folder, inside of which I have styles.css, right? So okay, all these things are correct, nothing to change anywhere. But then the last thing I can say, in this table that I have, right, I want to text align everything to the left. Okay, so what happens is that this guy should come to the left. Okay, let's do that. Okay, this guy comes to the left, but then it's looking as if this is a symbol. So we want to change this sort of font weight and make this bold so that it sort of stands out from the rest of the headers, not the headers, the rest of the body of the table. So I'm going to say font weight, let's make it bold. VLD, save this. Let's try to go ahead and here and see what happens. Okay, I think I made a mistake here. T-foot, main T-foot is font weight. Okay, T-footer. Let's see, did we actually, let's go back here. Okay, problem is we need a footer here instead of this. So I thought I did footer here, but I didn't do that. So let me just change this to footer, right? So if I change that to footer, I would get so I'm just going to do TR. Oh, well, this is footer. Am I getting this is bold? Yeah, this is bolden. So this is bolden, and T footer, this is bolden. But now if I want this to be bold as well, can I do that? Well, you can do that pretty easily by looking at the, no, it's not T foot. T foot is the last thing that happens, right? So T footer, this is the footer at the end. So And this cache is, so if you understand what's going on here, is that this cache is actually taking up 4 column spaces. So it's taking up this much, and we need to left align this to make it like properly format this. And then this one, where this is an empty, there are empty columns. There's one data TD, which is sort of taking up, this TD is taking up 4 spaces. So we say call space equals 4 for that reason, right? So call space equals 4 is for this reason. Okay, so if I want to just say this cache and want to just sort of separate this last line, I could either change the styling in the styles.css file, or I could just simply add an emphasis tag here, which is not correct, by the way. You should always add the styling to the end, to your styles.css, and not here. But let's just do that. This is one more way of doing it, so that you understand where this is working, right?